Well, anything that's in the top 10, we've shown that if it's fully resourced, we can actually get things done, and things have moved really well. I think beyond that, we found the first iteration of the work plan, it was the first time we've linked policy to and actions to resources. There was still too much in there. There were still things that the committees would like to have done, totally understandably. I mean, everything in there absolutely makes sense, but you just physically can't manage with the people we've got.
Welcome to the Bailiwick Express podcast. My name is Matt Fallais. The Express team will be joined each week by a guest for a series of podcasts. Each will shine a light on topics from across the bailiwick. The format will change week to week. We'll have debates, reviews, hot seat interviews and special guests. So stick with us as we discuss some of the most important topics we in the bailiwick face. In the jungle of Guernsey politics, Deputy Heidi Soulsby is undoubtedly one of the biggest beasts. Now in her third term in the States, and after 4 years as President of the Committee for Health and Social Care, she is Vice President of the State Senior Committee, Policy and Resources. Her role, in effect as Deputy Peter Ferbrache's number 2, is to keep the state show on the road, to oil the wheels of government, to lead the coordination of policy between all states' committees. And she's doing it in what often sounds and feels like a particularly partisan assembly. On the day the latest government work plan was released, which she has led, we sat down with Deputy Soulsby and asked her what she thinks the plan is achieving and what next. So, in your own words, as the politician who leads the development of the government work plan, can you summarise the purpose of the plan and how it's different from the many other plans which have come before?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time with the government work plan we're actually linking work of government to resources as far as we can. Before that, we've had loads of other plans. I mean, the last term we had this humongous, great policy and resource plan, which was basically everything that anybody wanted to do was in it, as you all well know. And anybody could say that, well, we're going to do this because it's in the policy and resource plan. So that was something the purpose of a plan really makes a lot of sense in terms of giving discipline to the states and also helping committees do stuff by having resourcing what they want to do. But the quid pro quo of that is making sure that they're only doing what we can actually get round to doing.
Can you point to areas where the plan has achieved things which you don't think would have been achieved without the plan?
I think it's difficult to say, well, that's happened because of the plan. What you can say is because committees have been less spreading themselves thin in loads of places, we've been able to absolutely focus on areas. I think the housing stuff has been helpful in terms of dealing with the fibre broadband and well, anything that's in the top 10, we've shown that if it's fully resourced, we can actually get things done, and things have moved really well. I think beyond that, we found the first iteration of the work plan, it was the first time we've linked policy to and actions to resources. There was still too much in there. There were still things that the committees would like to have done, totally understandably. I mean, everything in there absolutely makes sense, but you just physically can't manage with the people we've got to do any more. So it's really understanding, to cut your cloth, to make sure you're focusing on the things that you believe are really important. So the difference between what we had last year and what we've got now is we're saying, look, if you've started these things, finish them, and that's got to be the priority. So yes, we've got the top actions that we're asking the state to say, right, this is where we will throw resources at it. Then you've got the others that might have started and we want to see through to completion. And then there are others that might have been scoped but not been worked. And then there's other stuff, well, it's just a sentence. We've got to say, what really, can we do these now? Can we just wait till either later in the term or just push them into next term? So that's really an area where a lot of change has happened. And dealing with extant resolutions, saying, why do we still need that one? Is it just fallen away? So we've reduced those by over 100.
Are you saying you think the current states are generally better at prioritising?
Whether previous states had that opportunity or not, they might have been just as good. I just think that the mechanism to support them is different, and I think that is helping committees. And I've been pleased to hear committees say, well, we're not doing that, when some states members said, oh, we should be looking at this. And well, sorry, it's not in the government work plan. If you want that, then bring it to the government work plan, an amendment or something to the government work plan, say you want that there, and then we can debate whether that is something we should be doing. But it's given, I think one thing it has given is that discipline that hasn't been there before. And it doesn't mean that things won't change, and they do. I mean, we've seen Ukraine happen, and the invasion earlier this year. We know things change, and it's definitely not something that is stuck on and printed off on a piece of paper and left on a shelf. It's very much a living document. I think that's really important to get across. So we call it government work plan, but really it is the programme of government every year, and hopefully by the beginning of next term we've got a good basis for the new states to say, okay, this is where we're starting from. What direction do we want to go now? Is it the same or not? So, and every state might want to change what they do. They have done in every state I've been in, but hopefully this is the first time it's a good basis for how to run a government in a different sort of way.
But pulling together a plan like this, which works across the whole of government, is painstaking and at times is like wading through treacle. Can I suggest that it might also be that you have the combination of temperament and experience that has allowed this plan to work in ways which perhaps previous plans haven't? It's not so much what's in the plan perhaps then as the people involved, or in particular the person who's leading it.
I mean, I have to say that it was in my manifesto. I said I could see how we need to be more, government needs to be more focused and do things in a logical way. For me, it was that's where it been frustration in previous states to say, well, where's that structure to know what we're doing, is that we're prioritising things in the system that we've got. Well, we don't have a party system. We don't have manifestos to a great extent. In terms of a party machine creating a manifesto that it will then supposedly follow through in the next term. We're kind of having to create our own manifesto with the people around us. But I suppose really trying to put that process in at the start of term and then developing that as it goes along, I think is the best way of doing it. It's not less on ideological grounds, it's more on, well, what do we identify as things that are most important?
As you say, we don't have established political parties, but certainly observing from the outside, this does look like a fairly partisan state, quite a tribal state. So you're painting a picture perhaps of a more disciplined state, which understands the need to prioritise. But if you're putting together a plan that works across government, the tribal partisan nature of the state must actually be an additional complication.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think it's more tribal than I've seen in previous terms. But at the end of the day, people have got to come back to the States to get consent. So that's where it comes together. And I think that's what we're trying to do here, to say, look, it's a state's plan. It's not P&R's plan. And the Assembly decides what it wants. We've got parties, but none of them hold a majority. And there are views, very different views within the states, but it's the states will have spoken, and from that it gives then the backing for committees to do what's in that plan. So in some ways it helps committees more by having the states to say, yes, we support it. I mean, still there'll be people in the states who don't support it and they won't be happy, but it is that consensus government that we've got, and that's what we're working with now. So that's, I think, is the best way of dealing with that tribalism. You
are trying to build consensus, partly because you think that's the best way to govern, and partly because you're leading the government work plan, and that's the way it has to work. But you recognise that this is quite a tribal state. I mean, is that frustrating for you? Are you constantly having to pull the states back towards consensus in a way perhaps that you didn't think you would have to when you took this role on?
That's a really interesting point. I think I think that is why, you will see in the work plan, it's not P&R saying these are the top 10, agree with them or not. We're actually saying, look, this is from the ground up from committees. Now the states, you approve it. I think that is the best way, as I say, of dealing with it under the system. But I mean, we've always had members with different opinions, which is great. I think we're kind of this. There are nascent parties, but we've not got that disciplined party system yet. So it's all very much a bit of a hybrid from that point of view, which makes it quite difficult. I think we're probably in a transitional period, whether it's transitional into more of a party system or transitional out of it. I don't know at this stage. I don't know where I stand on parties either. I see that discipline in terms of, in theory, being able to determine the people that you want to stand under your party banner and making sure that they're the right fit to govern. So there's kind of that filter system before people get elected. But at the same time, what I like about this states is being, as an individual, you can stand for what you believe in and show, these are my beliefs, and if you vote for me, this is what you'll get.
I understand the point you make that the Policy and Resources Committee is a vehicle where the government work plan is concerned, and you're trying to draw together the aspirations of committees and then present it to the States Assembly for approval. But it surely does require quite a lot of ownership from the Policy and Resources Committee to lead that process. And I think I noted in the policy letter that there is a line or a sentence that states that the Policy and Resources Committee doesn't necessarily unanimously agree with all of the priorities that are being put forward. What exactly does that mean? This is a policy letter that's owned by the Policy and Resources Committee. Does it not have the support of all of the 5 political members of that committee?
I think each member has different ideas about what their priorities will be, and I've got no problem with that. I mean, I support what we've got there. In some places, I think no, I really want to go on more on that side than another side. But that's the system of government we've got with people with different views. I mean, and that's what you have, and I think it's better for the states to determine whether they believe in the priorities or not. I'm sure there will be amendments in there that will change it. I know there are views that say we shouldn't bother with climate change and all that environmental stuff. It should all be the economy. Whereas I know there are others who say, look, if we've got a hope of a future, we've got to be thinking about climate change. We've got to be thinking about the environment, because that's a way of growing a sustainable economy. So we've got both extremes all over the place in the States, and I've no idea whether that will. And I actually do. I'm sure we'll have those debates when it comes to it, which is good actually. I don't know whether the first one it was probably a lot for states members. Well, this time they've had an extra year. They've had their feet under the table. They've been in their committees. They'll have a good idea about what they think is the right thing to do and what isn't, and that's what we've got. 40 people can decide.
Ultimately, the government work plan will be judged, I suppose, by the achievements of the states, because it's trying to facilitate the work of government. And Deputy Furbrush, the P&R president, when the report was published earlier today, said that over the past 12 months he had been encouraged by what had been achieved, partly through the government work plan. And he talked about, as an example of what had been achieved, the ending of emergency powers for managing COVID-19, access for the bailiwick in trade in goods as part of the UK's post-Brexit arrangements, and supporting the local economy through things like improved digital infrastructure. Is it unfair of me to say that doesn't, for 18, 19 months into a term of government, which was characterised as a government grounded in action, that seems like quite thin gruel, doesn't it, for the first 18, 19 months?
I think that's because that's in one media release of one line. I mean, what I would refer you to is what we're doing as an annual monitoring report, actually saying the progress. That runs to 22 pages and it tells what different parts of government have been doing. And I think a lot has been done. I think there are certainly new members who think, oh, well, we should be able to do this. I mean, you're not in the States, and then you think, well, everything, oh, we can do this, that, and the other. I think it's been some have learnt, well, things aren't quite as simple as all that. You know, we're a government, we're not a private business that go off and say, right, I'm going to decide I'm going to move that tree from there to there, and we'll do it now. The government's got to take account of very many things and its stakeholders, and the fact that it's guardian of the public purse and things like that. But a lot of work has happened. Some of it is more visible to the public than others, and I think there are those that think, oh, well, action means what people see, and I think that absolutely it's got to be what people see on the ground. It's knowing that we're moving there, I think, is important. And also with the work plan, which is different from previous states, we've always had, and I'm sure we will have similar this time, but we've always had, since the 2 terms that I was there, they get to the last 3 or 4 months of the term and you get loads of stuff that's thrown at you. I mean, you will know how many hours, we've got 80 days of it all stuck in the States in the last year. But having the work plan and focusing on key things we want to deliver should mean that we'll have a better flow of policy letters to the States. I mean, it's always difficult with the structure we've got because you kind of start with it takes a while for each committee to then to get into the stuff that it wants to do as opposed to what's inherited. But there is a lot of work I do know going, which is why we're balancing those resources. We have to balance resources both from a policy development point of view, but then the implementation, and that's what this plan is understanding. It's not just throwing policy officers at stuff. And we've been great at that in the past. Things like SLAWS, a huge, great document, 32 resolutions in it. But we got there, we got as far as the strategy, and we got that approved, but it's then implementing it. We saw that with discriminations, absolutely.
Does that speak to a problem the states have always had, which is that they find it quite easy to commission reviews?
Yeah.
So you get lots of policy aspirations expressed in terms of evaluating this, developing options for this, reviewing or examining this. But it's very much harder to convert that into policy outcomes and actions.
Yeah.
Now, to what extent do you think the government work plan is overcoming that? Because I know you will say, well, it's for committees to get on with carrying out the actions, but the plan itself does still include quite a lot of that sort of language, doesn't it? Rather than nailing itself to particular policy proposals or outcomes, which obviously divide opinion, there's still a lot of talk about evaluating options, examining issues, reviewing areas of policy which have been on the agenda in some cases for years. So how do you think the work plan is helping edge the states towards action rather than bureaucratic reviews?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's been a big frustration of mine because we had, I certainly think it was the first term that I was in, and we had so many strategies that, there's always a strategy, and everybody tapped themselves on the back and said, oh, we're great, we've got a strategy for that, and never thinking about the next bit. I think that the way this will help is because we're going to make sure that we can resource the next bit of it. So we understand that, just looking at a plan isn't going to help actually get something done. And we're also trying to get away from those big strategy documents and say, look, what is really pressing? What areas should we really focus on more? And I think that harks back to the old action side of things. I mean, we know action can mean writing a plan as well. Everything's got its need. I mean, something like the strategic housing indicator, that's really important, so we know that we are building the right thing. We could just go out and build stuff and then find, well, yeah, but is that really helping where we've got a very big issue? It's go back to what I tend to say a lot, it's getting the balance right. It's neither it should neither be let's plan and never do anything, neither is it, right, we've got to do that and let's just do it and not take account of different all the issues that need to be overcome. I think we have fallen into that, and I think part of the problem is that risk aversity of the states. So we've got to cover this all off. We've got to look at what all the potential downsides are, and goodness knows how many SWOT analyses I've read in the states past, and to the extent, well, I don't know if we want to do any of it because it all looks too much. But it's about getting, say, that balance right and understanding what risk are we happy to accept. We tend to be very risk averse, and I think we can just step back a bit and be less so.
But every every government in the world, to some extent, is blown off course by events.
Yeah.
What do you think is coming down the track towards the states over the next year or 2 years, which will divide public opinion, and the states will face real tests in the way that perhaps they haven't so far? What do you see on the horizon as likely to do that?
Well, we know we've got issues around how we deal with health. I mean, I've known that. I was in health bashing on about it last term, and the fact that how we approach health might be very different. We've also got the tax review itself. I mean, that clearly is a decision that's got to be made, and it's not the easiest one. And every politician that joins the states, bar a very few, will say they don't want to increase taxes, and that's not really great at this moment in time, and that's going to be very difficult to. I mean, you're not going to please anybody if you want to increase taxes, and so any deputy coming in is nervous about it. Clearly,
your PNR is not going to get substantial tax increases through this state, is it? We'll have to try. I mean, I think that's important, but we need to make a decision by the end of this year what we do, and that's a crucial thing. A lot of people are putting their hopes on this corporate tax review. I think it might help a bit, but I've no idea whether it will actually deal with the issue we've got. I think people are very happy when they come in and they say, right, well, we just cut services, cut what the government's bloated, it's too much. And then they realise, well, actually, most of the government is providing direct services to people, health, education being the biggest. And then they realise it's not quite so simple. It's not loads of civil servants in Frostside House that is causing the great expenditure that we have. It's increasing requirements from health and social care, standards change, you've got to keep up with the professional body requirements, and it gets more and more and more. And if we don't want that, then what do we want Guernsey to be? And those are real existential questions about future of Guernsey, rather than just saying, well, government's too big, let's cut it, or we need to provide this, that and the other, so let's spend it. We're saying, well, what do we want government to be? People think, we've always got to have our reserves. Is that, do we live with all these kind of reserves, or do we want to be like other nations that don't have that? You're touching on resources, and the states continue to have big policy ambitions in these important areas of island life, but also a commitment to reducing the size of the civil service and reducing the cost of running government. Are those two things not in conflict? No,
and I think what was never, although my concerns about last time when there were numbers bandied about, like, get rid of 200 people and 200 there, that's not the way of going about it. What is it you're saying by that? That's really, for me, it's about making government more efficient. It's not about how many numbers, it's about making more government efficient and as best they can in making best value for money out of taxpayers' money. That's, for me, clearly we're not as digital as the government should be. We don't service people that supports them rather than the hours of the states. People don't want to have to drive off to another part of the island just to sort out their driving licence, and they'd rather do it in the comfort of their home, like what hours suit them, and we just need to think about new ways of doing stuff, and that's what for me, that's what it's about. It's not about, we need to cut headcount. That's pointless. You cut a load of people out, and then we find out that's actually counterproductive. I very much feel that was the case with the FDP, and because that had started before I came to the States, and you could see in certain areas we're just, we need to make savings, so we won't recruit to these positions, and you found that all that did was put off the inevitable and actually cause more problems that then had to be solved by bringing in more people. So it should never be done on a headcount basis. It should be done by how can you make things better? Because I feel that if you get the model right, this is one thing I say quite regularly actually, if you get the model right, the finances follow, and you shouldn't be doing something just on the basis of the finances. You think, what can you do better?
Do you think in saying that the Treasury is gradually becoming less influential in this states than it has been previously?
I think the important thing that we're trying to do is bring Treasury into the whole sphere of governments in a way that so it's more balanced, so we don't just have the Treasury voice, which is obviously understandable, spend as little as possible. It's more about, well, yeah, but how do we provide this service then? And so if we're not providing this, are we doing things in the best way, or are we causing ourselves more problem? And I think with the structure within the interim CEO who's done, I think he's helping that. So it's no criticism of Treasury at all. It's making it more part of government than before. Perhaps that's where the previous structure was helpful in bringing Treasury into the fold rather than having it a separate body. I don't know. I'm not going to say whatever the current review is doing. But
we'll talk about that.
That is one benefit of that, possibly.
Reshaping government is something you're leading on, and we'll touch on that in a moment. But some specifics in the government work plan stand out. I mean, very early on in the report, there is a very striking paragraph, and Deputy Ferbrache referred to this in his quotes when the policy letter was released. It says, the island's housing needs and the increasing cost of living are the two most pressing and immediate domestic pressures which the states must tackle. These things are incredibly difficult to address, though, for a government.
Oh, absolutely.
The states have limited levers available to influence policy in those areas. Unemployment is continuing to decline. Statistically, we have full employment. Our economy is not booming, but it's performing very healthily relative to most other economies. Is it not just inevitable that in that kind of environment where there are global inflationary pressures, housing costs will escalate significantly year on year, and there will be increasing pressures on cost of living? What can the states actually do in practice to alleviate these things?
You're absolutely right. I mean, this is a global issue, and it's a problem facing all governments. I mean, the UK government's just been criticised for not dealing with cost of living, and they're probably saying, well, how can we deal with this, that and the other, and because everything that government does will come at a cost. That's absolutely clear. If we're going to support people in cost of living, it's hard to see how you can do that without it costing government in some shape or form. From a housing point of view, I'm pleased the way that we're moving towards supporting affordable housing in a way that states seem to want to grasp before. I think now it's seen as an issue, and I'm really hopeful that we can make a difference on that front. And that then will help. I mean, it's all parcel cost of living. The biggest costs of people are their houses, whether they're renting or they're buying or whatever. And I think that will be critical. Other things that we can help them from in terms of energy costs, but also resilience in terms of climate change. Even it all links back to if we support people in terms of making their energies more energy efficient, well, that will both help them, and it will help the climate change mitigation, which we've all signed up to. And there are elements, if you see within those priority actions, where they do deal with those key issues, and particularly from the cost of living point of view.
So the big affordability index with housing historically has been the relationship between average earnings and housing costs, which I think now are back up to something like 16. So the average price of a house is 16 times average earnings. I mean, when the states are saying here in this government work plan that housing needs must be tackled, a lot of people reading that or reading reports on that will think that what that means is that the cost of housing relative to their earnings will come down. is that seriously? Does the states going in the year ahead going to attempt to bring down that affordability index so that relative to earnings, housing becomes more affordable in a year or in 2 years than it is now?
Of course, the index is all based on purchase price, so the price of the properties that have been bought and sold, not necessarily the average price of or average value of a house in Guernsey. And I think that's where government can help, is supporting people in terms of affordable housing, that makes that average, that price, it could go down, because if those are what purchased, doesn't mean that the innate value of somebody's house will go down. It just means that you'll have more houses on the market which people can actually afford. And I mean, that's something I've been battering on about since I was elected, which didn't get much traction, I think, for the first few years. But now, as I say, I'm really pleased it is. But no, none of it's easy, and it's shared. I mean, I think actually Guernsey's in a better place than Jersey even on this front. And also we've got to think about, it's got to be looked at, as we said here, in terms of population immigration. What do we want that population? Do we want more and more people coming over here, or do we want people to be more productive? And how do we, if we don't want more and more people, how do we make people more productive? Well, you have a happier health workforce, environment in which people feel, they're living in better accommodation, that they're less stressed, and how can we help them from that point of view, and help employers help people? It's not just about saying we guess we've got full employment, so we need to bring in loads and loads of people. It's about how can we make more and support people on Ireland.
But governments around the world are committing huge sums of money to try to assist their people with cost of living pressures. Are the states actively monitoring or actively considering what may have to be done in terms of more investment to alleviate energy bills or various other ways in which the cost of living crisis is likely to erupt in the coming months? And might this end up being really quite costly for the states this year?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know at this present moment in time. I know various committees who with responsibility in that area, certainly environment and infrastructure, ESS very much are looking at that. We've got the economic indicator work, which is looking at what's the minimum people need to survive. And I think a lot of that will really help inform us about what we need to do. That might well show that we do need to increase the benefits that we provide. I mean, I haven't seen it yet. I am interested to see what it does actually say, because from that it'll be a very good indication, quite literally, of what what is the landscape like out there for people. I mean, we've not been seeing the heights that the UK have seen, but the potential is absolutely there.
An area you do know like the back of your hand is health and care.
Ah, well, yeah, I used to.
And there's quite a lot in the government work plan, inevitably, about health and care, including that there is a proposal framed in a very specific way, but it might lead to the states starting to review the legal status of cannabis. As a former president of the Committee for Health and Social Care, and in your role now where you can step back or sit above committee slightly, where do you stand on what is an increasingly public issue of whether cannabis should be decriminalised or legalised?
Yeah, I mean, that actually goes back to last term, and a result of an amendment from former Deputy Yerby about saying we need to look at this. One part that's been started, which was around sentencing and how we deal with people with small amounts of cannabis, and this is the bit that's left. So it's not something new that's put in there. It's like how we don't forget that bit. And I think majority anyway of health committee really think that's something we should be following up. For me, it is a debate we need to have, and I have read a lot about it. I do think it is absolutely worth a debate and worth considering. I can see decriminalising it possibly is might be the way to go, but I want that work to be done so we can actually evaluate it really with the evidence there and say, look, does this make sense for Guernsey now? And I think because we have to think about Guernsey, where we are and our relationships with, say, the UK, etc., in terms of what we do. And also the impact, on people, whether it does make sense. So even though I was on health for years, it's something I'm happy. I think that we should be doing that work. And what's coming to the States now is to say, we're asking the States, do you agree that we should be scoping this? That's where we are. We're not saying, do you agree that we should be debating whether it should be decriminalised or legalised? It's saying, should we start going down that road? And I think there is an argument, as you say, that for that. But I think it's a very polarising issue. I think a lot of people will think no, absolutely not, and other people, a very vociferous number, who think yes, we should. But for me, I want to know that we've thought about this in the context of Guernsey.
That's going to be a very interesting debate. Another interesting area, health and care area in this plan, is that there is talk of investigating an insurance scheme for the cost of primary care, GP costs. I don't know whether that work was started during your presidency of the committee, but what sort of form could that insurance scheme take? Is this potentially leading us towards a primary insurance scheme in the same way that secondary healthcare has been funded through an insurance scheme for the past 20 years or more?
Yeah, I mean, that it was started in the last term. You're absolutely right there, and we of course got a bit derailed by that thing called COVID. So that was put on hold for a couple of years. But I'm pleased that the current committee have been taking that on. I suspect, and I haven't heard what or seen the results of what they're doing yet. But yeah, I mean, there are options. Either we can outsource it and have our state's insurance provider. I think that was tried back in the day when they were trying to bring in secondary care, but that fell away. I think the potential provider pulled out. That is an option, or it is just saying, right, we do exactly, because we have our own insurance scheme in effect now through employer-employee contributions. So I'm assuming it's going to be one of those two. But
do you think that it's the kind of natural order of things that we as an island are moving towards putting an insurance scheme around primary care costs because it's just become too unaffordable? I
think we've got to always be aware of what, I mean, the biggest concern I have is, and it links to the whole cost of living, is that increased wealth gap on the island, and we saw that happening over the last time, and I think COVID hasn't helped. And I think what we need to make sure is nobody is prevented from going to the doctor because they can't afford it, and we do hear that is the case of some people, and that is absolutely something that we should be addressing. Same time, we've got a lot of people with private insurance, so we've got to balance it and say, well, look, if people can afford to do it, and quite easily, why are we then funding it in a different way? I think we've got to look carefully at this, because just by increasing contributions somewhere, then loads of people, then generally it's not helping them. It's getting that balance. But absolutely, we know with the wealth gap, the poorer you are, the more likely you are to be ill anyway. And it's trying to make sure we stop people getting to that point where their health it impacts both their work, their health, the environment they live in, because they can't afford anything better, all contributes them to be getting worse. And that's, for me, is like the biggest thing in a lot of the stuff that we do in government.
Just finally on the government work plan. It's been published a few days later than you intended, and as I understand it, that may have a knock-on effect in terms of when it can be debated. Can you just explain what happened there? Why was it late, and what might happen as a consequence? It was
to allow presidents to have a sneak peek, effectively, or to be able to see the plan before we put it out. The reason, that's why we did it. What we're planning to do is, instead, it's meant to be debated on the 14th of June, but with the end of June states is very light anyway, and we thought, well, why don't we just move it to that session and have the debate then? So effectively, it's probably given states members longer to actually consider it, and because we could have said, can we just allow us to do it late, and we'll have a shorter time between now and the States. But we thought it kind of made sense, given the size of it, and it deals with the whole of government. We should have it, give people longer to consider it. So that's why.
Okay. Finally, I want to talk about reshaping government, which is the title that is given to the review of the machinery of government, which is going on in this term and which you're leading. I think I'm right in saying the Policy and Resources Committee, at least by a majority, that has members who have previously declared that they would like the island to move more towards a cabinet system of government. Is that where that review of government is inevitably going to lead, do you think?
I don't know at this stage, but I don't know if people really understand what they, when they say, executive or committee consensus system, the implications or what that means in practice. Because it's great to be in charge of something and just go and do it. That's great, but then you've got to step back and say, but that's what's going on in Russia, and just be careful what you wish for. And I think those things are quite important to understand. It's okay having that kind of executive system as long as you've got the people in there that you want to be in there. If they're not the people you want, it can make it very difficult. Those are things that we have to consider. What I will say, you're sat in that chair having had a very big influence in what we've got now. I don't think the system is broken. I really don't. I don't think there are challenges with it, as well with every system of government. But there are benefits of what we've got as well. So I wouldn't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, if you see what I mean. I think it's very much about saying, well, that bit doesn't work. How can we deal with it better? And
do you look at Jersey's ministerial system with envy?
No, and I think the last few years has shown it's not necessarily a better system. And people they say, at COVID we had this small group of doing such and such. Yeah, but then that was when a lot of the rest of the government went quieting down, because they knew that the focus was on COVID. And I don't see, given how long it went on, I think there was more concern the longer it went on about having just a small coterie of people making decisions. And I get that. I don't think it's great for a long time. It absolutely worked, I think, as we were dealing with the pandemic, and worked quite well. But as an ongoing structure, I think that would cause a bit of concern. I think in terms of transparency, it's much harder from a democratic point of view. But the Jersey system hasn't proven itself to be any better at all. I don't see that it has. We see the counterpoint. You've always got to remember the quid pro quo. So you have, again, people talk about executive system. They understand, well, that needs to be balanced out by a scrutiny function which is beefed up and is greater. And I think Jersey have been really bogged down in the system they've had. You've only got to look at the new hospital there, and they're still no. I don't even know how far they are to a spade in the ground.
I know you're not going to preempt the proposals that will come from the Machinery of Government Review Working Party, but you're sitting there, you're chairing the meeting, so you've got a good feel for the evidence you're looking at and the views of all of the other members of that group. Do you think it's more likely that you will propose what might be termed evolution of the committee system than a more radical departure to a cabinet or ministerial system?
I think evolution is better than revolution in any event. It's how far that evolution goes is going to be the key point. But I think it was Deputy Latoc said, and it might have been in that debate or whenever it was, but it is about evolution rather than revolution. I think if we went from one system to something completely different overnight, I think that would be difficult. I think what we can do is help decision-making process, what people might think, they say, well, that's an executive system. But the truth is we've got an executive system anyway. It just operates through the states. The question is, where does that executive, that decision-making, where do we want the balance to be? Is it less in the states? Is it more out of the states? And that's what we've got to look to. it's all part of some kind of continuum.
Okay, well, clearly the government work plan and the review of the machinery of government is keeping you busy. You've been in the States now almost exactly 10 years.
Yeah, I know.
Do you still have the appetite for it? For another 10 years, do you think?
God, I think that would be too long. Absolutely too long, yeah. I just look at it in terms of what we need to get done. Yeah, I'm like the MyGov stuff I'm doing, machinery of government stuff. Other stuff where we can work better with the community, third sector, with people outside government, and make it so we're all get to the point where it's Guernsey doing something rather than what's the government doing. That's always been the bugbear in mind. People, what's the government doing about that? Well, what's the government doing this about that? I'm trying to understand that because we're such a small place, we can work far more closely together. I can see that has been a frustration though for those people outside government, because I see how government does work. So those are the elements we've got to see. How can we improve so we can work better together?
Okay, Deputy Soulsby, thank you for your time and good luck with the government work plan debate next month.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for listening to the Bailiwick Express podcast. The title track was Shift My Weight by Luno. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe and share. Remember, you can always hit bailiwickexpress.com to stay right up to date with what's happening in the Bailiwick. You can find us online, on social, on email and on internet radio. There'll be more from me, Matt Fallais, and all the Bailiwick team next week.